If you're looking at who got to the line first in the race, you don't have to go any further down than the thickness of the race rope or something like that. You don't have to go down to atoms or molecules. So if it's outside the context of your investigation, it's outside the context of how far you have to divide the half and half and half and half. The Greeks, however, were worried about infinity and so on, and were very confused about that and never figured it out. There's more on that. It just keeps going. Just have to buy this book if you want to know more. Skip a bit down to page 82 now. We're just about the end of the chapter. It has often been pointed out that in some of his more elegant theorems he performs the equivalent to the operation of integration and integral calculus, Newton. Of considerable interest in the history of mathematics is his system of representing large numbers outlined in the Sand Reckoner, and his determination of pi as, get this, 3 and 10/71 is less than pi, and pi is less than 3 and 1/7. So it's somewhere between 3 and 10/71 and 3 and 10/70. What strikes the historian of science as the most important achievement of Archimedes is his extraordinary influence on the development of a mathematical and quantitative view of physical problems in the 16th and 17th century, an influence that had already been previewed by the spread and use of some of his works in the 13th century. As part of the Renaissance and revitalization of Europe after the Dark Ages was the discovery of not only Greek philosophy, but Greek thinkers in general, Archimedes, scientists, mathematicians, etc. We can conclude our brief summary of Hellenistic mathematics with passing reference to the third of the great triumvirate, Apollonius of Perga, who flourished at the end of the 3rd and beginning of the 2nd centuries BC. Of the 11 works attributed to him, the most important, and one of the 2 to survive, is his treatise on conic sections, which deals, of course, with theorems relative to ellipses, parabolas, and hyperabolas. It represents the culminating effort of some 2 centuries or more of study of conics that grew out of attempts to solve such classical problems as that of the duplication of a cube. He's got more in Appendix 3 for some remarks on conic sections. Get the book if you're interested in that. Its influence both upon Arabic mathematicians and later upon early modern scientists such as Galileo and Newton was extreme. Large influence upon Arabic mathematicians and early modern scientists. Now, it makes me wonder, it's said that the Arabs developed algebra during their golden age while Europe was in a dark age. And it makes me wonder if you got into it and got up to your elbows in math and the history of it, would you in fact find that the Arabs sort of took the next step or refined Greek thinking? They were just sort of the babysitter for it or something like that, maybe? Possibly, I don't know. We are not to think that Greek mathematics immediately declines with the passing of Euclid, Archimedes, and Apollonius, or that its study is limited to them. Only the 3 greatest of the Greek mathematicians have been selected for the present discussion. Greek mathematics continued to be studied and written about during the whole late antique period. Hero of Alexandria, Diophantus, Nicomachus, Pappus, and Proclus. Some other ones there. Alright, we have the next chapter was supposed to be on physics, Greek physics, because we weren't quite done with Greek science, were we? Physics still remained. But, first of all, I was bored with it. I want to get on to the good meat and potatoes. But second of all, I'm going to do a history of science. And I don't want to totally exhaust that topic here, even though totally skipping Greek physics is kind of sinful, because it held hegemony clear up until Galileo's day, and Galileo was put under house arrest for denying statements of Aristotle's physics. So we hadn't ought to skip it maybe, but I was bored with it. Maybe we will revisit it after we have the golden age of Athens and Sparta on the table. So now we are going to go into Athens and Sparta proper. We're going to start studying them in detail, in depth. I'm going to start with a little blip about Sparta, and then we're going to do Athens for quite a bit. We're going to start Sparta and Athens from the ancient city again by Fustel de Coulanges, or Coulanges, or whatever. And we're going to start on page 237. We're going to do that for just about 6 pages, and then we're going to go to a history of the ancient world again, back to Star, which was our first major source. So here we are. History of the revolution at Sparta. We've seen the general wave of revolutions in which kings and aristocracies and then tyrants took hold, and so on. Well, Sparta always had kings, and still the revolution of which we speak was accomplished here as well as in other cities. It appears that the first Dorian kings reigned as absolute masters. Remember, the Dorians were the invaders from Europe. But in the third generation, the struggle commenced between the kings and the aristocracy. During the 2 centuries, there was a series of struggles which made Sparta one of the most unique cities of all Greece. Lycurgus, or Lycurgus, appeared in a time of dissensions. He's an important person, and his reforms dealt royalty a blow from which it never recovered in Sparta. He arranged so that the kings were thenceforth subordinate to the Senate in whatever concerned the government, and that they were no longer anything more than presidents of this assembly and the executors of its decrees. So the assembly becomes the major power. A century later, royalty was still farther weakened. The executive power was taken away and was entrusted to annual magistrates, who were called ephors, E-P-H-O-R-S. Skip just a bit. The ephors pronounced judgments in civil cases, while the Senate tried criminal cases. The ephors, with the advice of the Senate, declared war, or settled the articles of treaties of peace. In time of war, 2 ephors accompanied the king and watched over him. They decided on the plan of the campaign and superintended all the operations. What remained then for the kings, if the law, foreign relations, military operations were all taken from them? What the hell was the king doing? They had the priesthood left. Herodotus describes their prerogatives. Quote, if the city offers a sacrifice, they have the first place at the sacred repast. So when they sacrifice a bull, you would think, in the idea of destroying a value for nothing, they would destroy the bull in the name of the idea that it's going up to God. Actually, they end up, what they do in Greek times at least, and I don't know, probably most cultures, they cut off the tail, cut out some of the useless entrails, a couple other things, they burn those, then they cook the rest of it and eat it in the feast. That honors the gods. The priests and the kings get the first seat. Now, in other cultures, priests ruled as voodoo men and shaman, but in the Greek city-states, the priests were the denuded kings. They're served first, they have a double portion, all very important in a day and age when people starve periodically. They are the first also to make a libation, and the skins of the victims belong to them. So every time there's a sacrifice, the skin goes to the king. Each one receives twice a month a victim, which he sacrifices to Apollo. End quote. That was all from Herodotus. Now from Xenophon. Quote, the kings offer the public sacrifices, and they have the best parts of the victims. End quote. If they did not act as judges, either in civil or in criminal affairs, they still had reserved to them the right of deciding in all affairs which concerned religion. In case of war, one of the kings always proceeded at the head of the troops, offering sacrifices and consulting the presages. In presence of the enemy, he slew victims, and when the signs were favorable, he gave the signal for battle, but not when it was not favorable. During the combat, he was surrounded by diviners, who indicated to him the will of the gods, and the flute players who sounded the sacred hymns. The Spartans said the king commanded, because he was in possession of both religion and auspices. But the ephors and the polemarchs directed all the movements of the army. We can therefore justly say that the royalty of Sparta was merely an hereditary priesthood. The same revolution